hard to know where to start to tell the story of my grandmother's 100 years, spread out so well and so beautifully through the decades. I could start with numbers, with what 100 years look like from the outside. It's 18 presidents, it's 2 world wars, it's more than 120 months, more than 5,200 weeks, and more than 52 million minutes. It's 6 siblings, 3 children, 4 grandchildren, and 2, soon to be 3, great-grandchildren. It is 73 years of marriage in the house your father built, where your story both starts and stops. And if the numbers could tell the story, I could stop there. And it would be impressive enough. It would be more than enough to lay out 100 years in front of you, to point at the time, to tell you to look, to pay attention. But the truth is, lots of people live to be 100, older even. It's not the time that impresses me, it's the woman who filled up that time. A Vida, historically, is a short story. It is the biography of a troubadour. Vida means life, but more precisely, it describes the way that you tell a story about a person's life. So what then is our Vida's Vida? What is her story? To me, and to the people who love her, her story is one of love. As I'm sure so many of us can attest, our memories of her are warm and inviting, and they wrap themselves around us with the kind of unspoiled mix of nostalgia and happiness that her very favorite novels would describe as she sat reading them in her den. Unaware that the stories committed to paper in her lap were playing themselves out all around her, one interaction at a time. Vida, the author, all the while. Some of my happiest childhood memories are with my grandma, eating Cocoa Puffs in the kitchen, the sound of her Crispix cereal hitting the white bowl, picking stones out from the lentils that we would buy at the market, side by side at the kitchen table while a rectangular pizza crisped and browned in the oven on a cookie sheet. Just my grandma and me. I remember laying on my stomach in her living room on Saturday mornings, watching older episodes of Saturday Night Live on Comedy Central as we waited for Aunt Ada to pull into the driveway. My grandfather burning toast at the store. I remember the mysteries of peaches and wine next to the pool. I remember thinking that while it was true that my grandfather always drove with 2 feet, just as true was the fact that my grandmother's car had seats that were as soft as clouds. Feeling the pinch of my grandma's fingers on my back as she held on to me, steadying me as I rode a bike for the first time, protecting me, and remembering that same moment with my hand on her back at my wedding, steadying her as we danced for the first time, protecting her. I remember without fail, flatly rejecting 6 of the 7 fishes, but there was always extra shrimp cocktail just for me. I remember the Christmas ornament that I made her in preschool. Nothing more than a glittery styrofoam cup with a suspended jingle ball inside. I remember seeing that ornament displayed on the front of the tree every single Christmas until that little glittery cup fell apart. Not gone, just loved away. I remember my grandmother turning me to face her, hands on my shoulders, after I said that I had hated someone on TV. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Don't say that. Don't leave any room in your heart to hate people." I remember at Children's Mass when Father Tom asked us if anyone knew the story of Beauty and the Beast, and then mistakenly asked the little blonde boy with the frantically waving hand to share what he knew of the story. I remember the pride on my grandmother's face when that little blonde boy proceeded to recite the entire 253-word prologue, verbatim, hijacking Holy Angels Church with his desire to make his grandma proud. I remember the woman who waited to see if I would realize that the blanket that she had spent months knitting as a graduation gift for me was red, black, and white. When she didn't think that I understood, she put her hand on top of my hand, 82 years old and 17 years old, and she dipped her head to say, "For the New Jersey Devils." I remember learning more about who I was, discerning my place in the world, and fumbling along that path to self-discovery that we all endure. I remember sitting next to her, trying to find the words to tell her that I was gay. Luckily, she was watching Will and Grace. Gave me a chance. I thought that I would have to dispel stereotypes because of the portrayal of gay characters on TV in the early 2000s. I said, "Grandma, I'm not like Jack from Will and Grace. I'm just me still." My grandma didn't miss a beat. She turned and she said, "Well, you're no Will." That I remember. A few years later, I wanted my grandma to be among the first to know that my partner and I had gotten engaged. My grandmother held my hand and she said, "I can tell by the way I see you looking at each other that you really love each other. I love you, and I'm so happy that I will get to see my grandson get married." She asked me if I was going to get married at our church, Holy Angels in Little Falls. I told her I wouldn't be able to do that. After explaining why, my grandmother looked at me and said, "Well, I don't understand. I can't understand. That doesn't seem fair." And that's the thing. There was no hesitation. There was no reconciling. There was no placing of specific thoughts in specific boxes. I was never less than. I was always just Anthony. I was reminded this week that at our wedding shower, our superhero-themed wedding shower, our guests were asked to fill out a name tag. 2 empty lines, very simple. You were asked to give your name and your superpower if you had one. My grandfather's name tag was simple. Frank, gardening. Grandma's was simple too. Name, Vida. Superpower, love. Simple. And when I shared my first dance with my husband on the day of our wedding, it was in the shadows of giants who had done the very same thing 70 years earlier. Our first song was theirs, "Let Me Call You Sweetheart," having learned to love by watching those who did it earlier and better and for forever. These are the moments that made the woman invincible, always there. But beauty fades, as my grandma reminded me when we would talk about her courage in having faced cancer. Beauty fades, but life goes on. And it's the surrender of one that gives you the other. And so the invincible woman, the one who was always there, became less so. And we watched as the very real balance of power in our family swung. Less giving, more needing. Sometimes less talking, more watching. Always more napping. Less lentil soup, less VHS cassette tapes recording the latest episodes of favorite television programs, her stories, but not less love. Closer to the end, in the last few years, I watched her, the woman whose greatest joy in a day was rolling a ball back and forth on the living room floor with her great-grandson. The great-grandson whose father laid on that same floor 30 years ago, waiting for his afternoon swim. She was still the woman I caught singing Italian songs from her childhood, my newborn son in her arms at Christmas, a few short shuffles away from the Christmas tree. I watched as her aides, Millie, Faye, Sandra, Denise, Deborah, went above and beyond the call of duty and the scope of their job to take care of her and our family. Those women gave us more time together than we will ever be able to understand. It's hard to tell the stories I've shared today to a 5-year-old. They'll come in time. But the women who took care of my grandmother made sure that there was a connection to that joy and that humanity that was inside of her. After 100 years of work and love and loss and exhaustion, the love was still there to uncover. When I think of the women who ensured that the grace and dignity with which my grandmother carried herself in life would stay with her until her very last day, hair curled till the end, I'm reminded of one of my very favorite quotes. Be as fearless as the women whose stories you have applauded. I have learned from my grandmother that we are called to love. We are called to listen. We are called to learn. And if we do these things with the aplomb they deserve, for enough of a stretch of time, then maybe we are able to stitch together enough of a story worth telling, maybe even worth applauding. And so today, here, we are bruised as we celebrate a century of grace, and it's easy to be sad. It is harder to do this the way she would have wanted, to look at today not as something to be sad about, but as if we have reached the last page of our very favorite story on a shelf that is high but not quite out of reach. She is ours, still and always will be, and we are hers. We are her Vida, her story. To honor her is to make it the most exciting story, filled with all the love we can muster for as long as we can. And if we do, we might be as lucky to have the same ending. Not gone, just loved away. We love you, Grandma.